A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Good Friday to you. Thank you so much for tuning in to another edition of Bearing Arms is Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. Happy to be behind the microphone with you once again. And thank you very much for the happy anniversary wishes, for the happy birthday wishes. I appreciate each and every one of them. Going to get to our top stories here in just one second, but do want to let you know, coming up in just a couple of minutes, you're going to hear from Cibola County, New Mexico Sheriff Tony Mace. We're going to be talking about that state's quote-unquote universal background check law, which went into effect on July the 1st. And the absolute unenforceable nature of this. Now, this law is being challenged in court. As a matter of fact, there are a couple of lawsuits taking place in New Mexico, but one of them in particular challenging this quote-unquote universal background check law. Sheriff Mace, one of many county sheriffs in the state of New Mexico who was staunchly opposed to the passage of this law. You had a majority of counties actually in the state of New Mexico declare themselves to be Second Amendment sanctuary counties. As a result of that law. And again, we'll get an update from the sheriff coming up in just a couple of minutes about how that's all working out. Meanwhile, topping our headlines today, Remington is asking the Supreme Court to hear an appeal of a lawsuit that is taking place in Connecticut right now. Some of the families victimized in the Sandy Hook massacre suing the gun company over its marketing of firearms. Yeah, now that we do have a federal law in place called the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act. It was passed back in 2005. And basically, gun control advocates say this is immunity for gun dealers. It's not. It does say that you can't hold a legal firearms manufacturer responsible for the third-party actions of a criminal. And that is what the attorneys for these families are alleging, that in essence, the marketing material that Remington produced for the Bushmaster rifle spurred on or helped to prompt or promote that attack in Newtown, Connecticut at Sandy Hook Elementary. So first, we got to see if the Supreme Court's going to take this case. They could not hear this case, in which case the Connecticut State Supreme Court's decision allowing this lawsuit to go forward would proceed. Supreme Court could weigh in and say, no, we think the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act prohibits this type of lawsuit. They could weigh in, I suppose, and say, yeah, this case can proceed. They could also hold off for now and weigh in at a later date, perhaps upon the conclusion of that trial in Connecticut. But it is another step in this litigation. Meanwhile, in Nevada, gun control activists are hoping that the attack at the Gilroy Garlic Festival is going to enable them to pass more gun control laws in the next legislative session. Nevada did flip in 2018. They all of a sudden had an anti-gun governor, had an anti-gun attorney general, and had an anti-gun legislature. And they used those numbers to pass gun control laws that they could not get through the legislature in years past. One of the bills, though, that did not see a lot of action, in fact, gun control advocates say was not a priority for legislators in Nevada this past session, was a bill that would have raised the age to purchase a firearm, any firearm, from 18 to 21. We've seen other anti-gun states around the country, like Washington State, adopt similar measures. As a matter of fact, that's being litigated in court right now. Because under current federal law, you have to be 21 to legally purchase a handgun at retail, but you can be 18 to legally purchase a long gun, rifle or a shotgun. We know that there are 18, 19, 20-year-olds who are living on their own. They are in the military, they are working, they may be married, they may have kids, and they're being told that their right to self-defense and their constitutional right to keep and bear arms doesn't kick in until age 21. So we'll see how this litigation works out in Washington State, but gun control advocates, they're not waiting for this lawsuit to be settled. They are going to move forward and push for similar laws depriving adult Americans of their constitutional rights as hard as they possibly can. This story from the Reno Gazette Journal talks about what's going on in Nevada, but don't be surprised if we see similar legislation introduced around the country in the coming months. Now, outside of the United States, down in New Zealand, they are still holding their quote-unquote buyback, their compensated confiscation program. And as it turns out, this compensated confiscation program is going to cost more money. At least it is very likely that that is the case, according to government officials. New Zealand's government didn't really know how much money to set aside for their compensated confiscation program. According to a news talk in New Zealand, right now, more than $12 million in compensation has been handed out, they say, to 4,200 New Zealand gun owners who have surrendered their heretofore legally owned firearms at collection points around the country. That comes out to about $2,850 New Zealand money per firearm. Government set aside about $200 million in New Zealand cash for the scheme, but a report by KPMG, commissioned by the New Zealand government, according to a news talk in New Zealand, revealed that there was a series of unknown factors when it came to trying to figure out how much money to set aside. They don't exactly know how many firearms they're trying to confiscate. And according to this report, the government settled on a scheme where gun owners would be paid for the guns that they're supposed to turn in based on the condition of the firearm. So if the government determines that that gun is in, quote, poor condition, you only get 25% of the base price of the firearm. If it's in average condition, you would get 70% of that market value, at 95% for a firearm that was in near new condition. But again, they don't know how many firearms that they're actually talking about. The report by KPMG says it's not clear whether the majority of prohibited firearms are at the midpoint of a price range, nearer the top end, or nearer the bottom end. The report also said, we understand from some firearms experts that there may be some very rare and highly collectible firearms that are now prohibited that may have values well over $10,000, even as high as $100,000. And again, you're not going to get what your firearm is worth when you are handing it over to the government, who says that you can no longer own that firearm. KPMG says that the observations they made in the report, they don't believe are, quote, robust enough to fully provide confidence in the financial implications of any of the buyback pricing options that are presented. Meanwhile, the police minister, Stuart Nash, says that the government will pay whatever it needs to get these guns out of the hands of legal gun owners and into the hands of the government. One of the minority parties, the ACT Party, David Seymour is the leader of the ACT Party. He said that the report shows that the government made critical decisions about this compensated confiscation program based on numbers that underestimated the cost to taxpayers. He said, quote, the government should have done its homework before deciding to ban hundreds of thousands of guns, but Jacinda Ardern was too eager to announce to the world's media that she had done so. Yeah, well, the buyback or the compensated confiscation program continues. The Ardern government is going to do everything that it can to ensure that they can tout it as a success. Meanwhile, I'm not sure, frankly, how many firearms are going to get turned in. We're in the midst of this quote-unquote amnesty window. Right now, the last report that I had seen was about 14,000 or so firearms turned in. But we could be talking again about hundreds of thousands of firearms that are in the possession of New Zealanders who've been told they can no longer own them. In the United States, we've got these magazine bans that have been popping up around the country. And the owners of these magazines that are banned are also told, well, you can't own those either. Right. Meanwhile, we've also got the quote unquote universal background check laws that are popping up on the books. Every private secondary transfer of a firearm supposed to go through a background check. How the heck is that supposed to work? Well, New Mexico is one of the newest states to adopt one of these quote unquote universal background check laws. It went into effect on July the 1st. And there was so much political capital spent in pushing this bill. And it's amazing when you think about this, because as we'll hear from our next guest, Sheriff Tony Mace of Cibola County, New Mexico, not only is this law unenforceable because how on earth do you figure out when somebody sold a gun privately on the secondary market? It's even worse than that. This is a misdemeanor level offense, and the way the misdemeanor laws work in New Mexico, there's almost a guarantee that this quote unquote universal background check law will never, ever be used. Take a listen. Sheriff, it's good talking to you again. Thanks so much for your time.
Good morning, Cam.
So we've been talking about this quote unquote universal background check law. Virtually every Democratic presidential candidate wants to put one on the books at the federal level. Y'all have been dealing with this in New Mexico since the 1st of July. So we're now a little bit more than a month in. I have to ask, first of all, have you made any arrests? Have you made any charges for anybody violating the state's quote unquote universal background check law?
I have not, and I've been checking with the colleagues, my other sheriffs across the state, and there hasn't been an opportunity where this particular law would have been used or been able to impact crime in any way, any shape, or any form. And you know, it's just like we initially said during the session: is it's an unenforceable law that the legislature passed. On these universal background checks.
Yeah, help me out with something, because I was doing a little bit of research. You said something the last time that we talked about the way misdemeanors are actually enforced in New Mexico. In order for this quote unquote universal background check law to be enforced, for an arrest to be made, for charges to be brought, you would actually need to have a law enforcement officer witness in person one of these prohibited transfers, and then and only then could they make an arrest and bring charges?
That's correct. And currently the way the laws are written in New Mexico in the statute is there's called the misdemeanor arrest rule. So the universal background check is a misdemeanor. So under the misdemeanor arrest rule, it basically says the officer has to witness the misdemeanor offense, has to be committed in his presence for him to be able to make an arrest. Now, there's exceptions to that as far as if somebody openly admits it. Well, again, in a situation like that, it would be something that would be issued a summons to court versus an arrest. But, you know, a lot of us rural sheriffs in New Mexico, we got more important things to do than worry about that misdemeanor that are really going to impact violent crime, drugs, different things like that. On a lot of on a different level. And you know, you've heard us say with our Second Amendment sanctuary resolutions that we're going to use our discretion and really not enforce that law, because again, it's ink on paper. It's not a tool that we can effectively use to impact crime in our communities. And we look at some of the other states that passed these universal background checks as well prior to New Mexico, and there's no statistics to show that they actually reduce crime or slow down the criminal element.
Yeah, I would imagine this is something that not even rural sheriffs, urban law enforcement officers have better things to do. I saw a story from KOAT out of Albuquerque the other day. Guy who is now accused of shooting somebody and killing somebody at a car wash. Turns out back in 2015, this guy was arrested for shooting a gun out the window of a moving vehicle. Just a couple of weeks ago, he was arrested for threatening a woman with a gun. He's back out on the streets. Last report, I don't think he's been caught. You know, this is another example, it seems, Sheriff, of violent criminals getting slaps on the wrist and being ignored by the lawmakers in power in New Mexico because they're too busy trying to pass laws that are aimed at, even if they're tough to enforce, but they're still aimed at the legal gun owners in the state.
Cam, you're absolutely right. And what it is in New Mexico, I mean, it's across the nation. Our constitutional rights are under attack every day. People want to blame the tool rather than the, politicians, they want to blame the tool rather than get to the root of the problem. And here in New Mexico, over and over and over, it's a repeat offender. It's somebody that's been in jail, out of jail. They've been in prison, out of prison. They have a huge rap sheet. And it's just, it's this whole it was called the Bail Bond Reform Act, and we call it the Catch and Release Program. Offenders, the criminal element, you can put whatever law you want on the books. They just don't follow it, and they just keep repeating. There's no consequences for their actions. So again, it's instead of focusing on those issues, we're talking about an inanimate object that's useless unless the person behind it has criminal intent. But again, that's the criminal element. By nature, they don't follow the law. So it's easier to go after the law-abiding citizen than it is to address the root of the problem, the actual criminal element, the people that are committing these crimes. And it's just until we can get our legislature or our lawmakers to focus on those issues, we're not going to see any change in the violence in New Mexico.
Unfortunately, I think that you're right. Now, we have seen, as I mentioned earlier in the program, a majority of counties in New Mexico have adopted these Second Amendment sanctuary resolutions. Majority of county sheriffs are opposed to these new gun control laws. I know that there's litigation taking place. And next year, we've got elections in New Mexico as well. And I'm guessing that this is going to be a very big issue, not just the universal background checks, but how so many counties and the residents in these counties across the state have been ignored by the lawmakers there in Santa Fe.
That's absolutely right. We have an election coming up in 2020. There's a lot of seats available in our Senate, our legislature, county elections, municipal elections. A lot of seats are available. A lot of people are going to be challenged. Across the whole state of New Mexico, you had citizens that were contacting their legislatures. They were going to committees. They were sending emails. They were sending letters, sending phone calls. They were telling our lawmakers and law enforcement, hey, this isn't what's going to fix the problem in New Mexico. And we've gotten so far away from a society to, people refer to our elected officials as leaders. Well, they're not our leaders. We are the leaders. We elect them to represent us when we elect them into office, they're to represent our voice as constituents and listen to what the citizens want. We represent them. And, when we seen this when the Second Amendment sanctuary resolution came up, there were hundreds and thousands of people showing up to these commission meetings telling their commissioners, hey, look, which are an elected body of government that says, hey, I don't like this. I don't want this. I want you to uphold your oath of office. I want you to listen to my voice. And this is what I want. And, you had 28 counties across the whole state of New Mexico comprised of Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, everybody that basically said, hey, this is what my citizens want. So this is what I'm going to vote on. And they passed that resolution. And again, this came up, this really got people across the state of New Mexico to say, hey, up to our legislature to say, hey, you represent me, and you should be voting when you vote on these bills. You should be voting the way that I want you to. And there was a radical push in our legislature this year, and one like none that we've ever seen. And the citizens are kind of and it just doesn't go into. It was a lot of the gun stuff, abortion issues, clean energy. There was a whole lot of stuff on there. And the citizens were just, they were dumbfounded because they weren't getting in their opinion, their voices, there wasn't getting heard. It was take it or leave it. This is what's on the table. So I think coming up this election process, a lot of people are going to look at that.
I was going to say, one last question for you. How is the grassroots energy right now? Clearly, while the legislature was in session, there was a lot of energy taking place at the local and county level. Has it sort of died down now that lawmakers have gone home, or are these activists still active?
The grassroots level here, the grassroots movement that we've started across our state is still hot. There's still movers and shakers out there. There's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of patriot groups. There's a lot of patriot rallies. Coy Griffin, the commissioner down in Otero County with Cowboys for Trump, he has a huge following. He's doing a lot of rallies, a lot of things going on. Blair Dunn from one of the other patriots, who's an attorney, filed a lawsuit against the state on the referendums, on the denial of the referendums from our Secretary of State. So there's a lot of things still happening. People are still out of their seats, and the The following is really growing in numbers. More citizens are getting involved with their government here, and that's a good thing. It really is.
It absolutely is. And we know, frankly, that the folks who want to pass these gun control laws, they're getting involved at the local level as well. They're showing up at school board meetings, county commission meetings, fair board meetings out in California. And really, it is up to us as individuals to respond and to show up as well, and to make sure that our local elected officials know who we are, that we're talking to them, that we're showing up at these meetings. And I'm really glad to see that that's happening there in New Mexico.
It is, and one of the important things that I want to mention too is for everybody that's watching, is it's important for us as citizens to engage with our elected government and use a fact basis platform, and not emotion like the other side uses, and non-factual comment statements or things like that. And I mean, what we need to realize, it doesn't seem like it, but gun violence is on a decrease, and it has been on a decrease. And it doesn't sound like it, and it doesn't seem like it, but statistically it has. And something that I believe that that complements that is there's been a huge increase in gun ownership, gun training, concealed carry permits, things like that. So I mean, there's a undeniable fact there that violence is on the gun violence is on a decline, but gun ownership is on an increase. And I mean, that's a fact that doesn't lie, and that's something that we really need to hit home with our elected officials and say, here's some facts, here's some proof, and really get them on our side to start looking at some of these issues from a factual basis, not an emotional basis.
Absolutely. Sheriff Tony Mace in Cibola County, New Mexico. It's always good talking with you, sir. Thanks for your time today, and hope we can do this again soon.
Thanks, Tim. You have a great day.
So we were talking with Sheriff Mace about that case out of Albuquerque. We've got another case today, another example, actually two examples of criminal justice system that seems to care very little about the violent criminal histories of some of the individuals that they come in contact with. This from Manchester, New Hampshire, the Manchester Union leader, a quote-unquote Nazi, self-described Nazi, accused of beating a woman to death in a Manchester housing project, had a lengthy criminal history. This guy's name is Damian Cease. He's 35. He is unfortunately a U.S. military veteran. Now he stands accused of murdering his girlfriend, bludgeoning her to death with a piece of furniture. And according to authorities, Damian Cease has had multiple run-ins with the law, going back to at least 2012, when he was convicted of assaulting a corrections officer. He got a 3 to 7 year sentence, at least a portion of which was suspended. Since then, he's had repeated troubles. Last year, he was arrested on 4 different charges in October of 2018 when he allegedly hit, choked, and threatened his girlfriend. Prosecutors ended up dropping those charges in February of this year. There was a suspended sentence for other domestic violence-related charges from 2018 as well. And as recently as June 24th, Cease was picked up on a parole violation, but he was back out on the streets and again allegedly able to enter his girlfriend's home, Jennifer Burpee's home, and attack her and kill her with a piece of furniture. Now, our armed citizen story of the day today comes from Nashville, Tennessee. And this also has some elements of a criminal justice system that is really light on criminals. A guy who's already been convicted of a felony at the ripe old age of 18, shot and wounded by a rideshare driver after the suspect ended up firing shots at the driver and his passenger the other night. According to Scoop Nashville, Jason Johns felt like he had been disrespected when the rider in this car got out, went into a liquor store, and actually held the door open for Johns. So when the rider came back out, got in the rideshare vehicle, the vehicle drives off, Johns follows. And when the rideshare driver pulled over to let his passenger out, Johns allegedly approached, opened fire from about 10 feet away, missing the driver and the passenger. The rideshare driver was armed as well, and he fired 2 shots at John, striking him. Johns ended up taking off on foot, leaving the stolen vehicle that he had arrived in behind. Showed up a short time later at Vanderbilt University Medical Center with gunshot wounds at last report. Looks like he is going to survive. According to Scoop Nashville, Johns was convicted back in 2015 of aggravated robbery. And then last year, he was charged in juvenile court with aggravated robbery after he admitted to taking a woman's car at gunpoint outside of an apartment complex. So within the last 4 years, let's say, or 3 years, because he's 18 now. So within the last 3 years, young Mr. Johns has been involved in 2 aggravated robberies before this latest incident. And again, out on the streets. Little to no time to show for it. As a matter of fact, I worry that this rideshare driver is actually going to face tougher consequences than Johns will, because this rideshare driver was, depending on what company he was contracting with, likely violated that company's policy. Both Uber and Lyft prohibit contractors from carrying their legally owned and legally concealed firearm while they're on the job in their own car. It's absolutely insane. And I know that there are a lot of drivers like this one in Nashville who would say, I guess I'm going to get fired. I'll take that risk. And they'll carry anyway. Again, at last report, this driver's not facing any charges. I don't suspect that he will be. But he very well could be looking for a new job because of these anti-self-defense policies from these ride-sharing companies. Let's get to today's good deed of the day here from Gloucester Township, New Jersey, where a police officer risked their life to save a 70-year-old woman from a burning home the other day. That's some water-related good deeds, so I suppose it's appropriate that we end the week with a fire-related good deed. Police say the officer, one of the first people on the scene, rushed into the home, filled with smoke, pulled the woman out. She was flown to the hospital in a critical condition to be treated for burns. The officer is also being treated for smoke inhalation as well as burns to his neck. Authorities say, thankfully, they are both stable. It looks like both are going to recover. We don't know the name of this officer in Gloucester Township yet, unfortunately. CBS Philadelphia did not have the name. I don't know that police have released the name of this officer. I sure hope that they do, so that the officer can get the attention that he deserves, but in the right place at the right time and willing and able to do the right thing. We thank that Gloucester Township, New Jersey officer for his good deed. And that is, unfortunately, all the show that we have for you today. I appreciate you watching the first week of Bearing Arms' Cam & Company. Look forward to doing this again very, very soon. And you have a great weekend. We'll see you back here Monday with more Bearing Arms Cam & Company.